30% of newcomers under the age of 35 say they are likely to leave the country within the next 2 years.
About 3% of family physicians in Ontario, that's 385 out of 12,000, stopped practicing. It accounted for 170,000 patients losing access to primary care.
Anybody who has any sort of health issues, whether they've been ongoing or just new, if you don't have a family doctor, there's nowhere for you to go.
Well, I don't think, as long as my son's there, I don't think so, because that's a big advantage to being there. But we're doing so much traveling, my wife and I, that in some sense, we don't live anywhere. You know, I mean, we were 3 weeks, 2 weeks in the UK, and then a week in Washington, and now we've been on the road. We're going to be on the road pretty much nonstop till March of 2023, because the tour ends in the States at the end of April. We'll hit 40 cities, and then Canada, assuming that's possible, but it looks like it probably will be, and then the UK and Europe. We're going to be back in Canada for 2 months in the summer, and then down to New Zealand and Australia and Southeast Asia, and then I'm going to Cambridge, I believe, in January to do a seminar on Exodus, which is what I wanted to do at Cambridge multiple years ago before they canceled me, but that's all been sorted out. And so it looks like there's a very high probability that that will occur. And then that's really as far out as we've looked. So that'd be March of 2023. And God only knows what shape the world's going to be in at that point. There's hardly any sense in planning out past that because everything is in such flux. There's no predicting.
I know Canadians don't understand this, but let's say that the new media, which is the internet itself, was capable of producing some of the opposition to the globalists and Trudeau that the legacy media have abandoned. And I'm thinking of people like, say, Russell Brand, who's on the left, and not to mention, you know, any of the conservative commentators in the United States. But now what the Bill C-11 has done is basically, and this is unbelievable, I can't believe I read it correctly, it basically defined all internet content of any sort as subject to the same CRTC, Canadian Radio and Television Corporation. They've defined them as broadcasters that are equivalent, let's say, to CBC or CTV. Now, the reason that those broadcasters are different was because the government had to parse up the airwaves, because the airwaves were actually a scarce resource. Now, and the internet is not a scarce resource. And now, as far as I can tell, reading Bill C-11, which is an unbelievably vague document, if a internet service provider, a private one, so a small business person like me, let's say, doesn't broadcast in French and English and in Indigenous languages and to any diverse range of people with disabilities and highlight Canadian content, then the government can do what it needs to do to deprioritize their distribution, and they'll do that by putting pressure on the search engine providers like YouTube and Google, or just stopping them altogether. And I read this bill, and all of it, again, Rex, too, the bill is couched in all this diversity, inclusivity, and equity terminology, which it's the same solution to every problem, right? And so not only do we have this massive press collusion with the government that's absolutely unconscionable in a Western democracy, but we also have now the government clamping down more viciously than in any other developed country on the freedom for Canadians to get access to all of the information on the internet, not just that produced by Canadians. They hand wave about diversity, inclusivity, equity, the environment, and then in Bill C-11 they add the protection of the Canadian culture to that, and which sounds like something taken out of like 1979 or 1980. It's such an outdated idea. And one of the other terrifying things about Bill C-11 is that we won't, in Canada, if this is actually enforced, with the collusion, let's say, of Google and YouTube and so forth, and the forced collusion in some sense, because those companies are not going to break the law, Canadians won't even know what information is being hidden from them, because the laws will take the form of invisible algorithms that merely deprioritize at the listing of content that doesn't meet the impossible criteria that have been laid down. And Bill C-11 is basically written in a way that allows the government to interfere with the promulgation of any information that they deem unacceptable for any reason. Because there are so many restrictions on what you're allowed to do now that there's no possible way that any member of the alternative media can meet the criteria. It's just not possible. And it won't just be YouTube broadcasters and podcasters. It's going to be people who provide all sorts of services online, because the bill is written in such a vast manner that the provision of any services on the internet, and we're talking about the internet here, right, which is something people really depend on, that'll all fall under the invisible auspices of a tiny coterie of ideologically addled bureaucrats and algorithms.